Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Soulful Side of Life with me, Portee. I hope you're well and having a good week. And I enjoyed this conversation with Degen Pener. He is my former editor from The Hollywood Reporter. And Degen has a special place in my heart because he gave me a chance. And we can all relate to and remember the people who gave us a chance, as Melinda Gates is quoted for saying, we all get to where we get to in life is because somebody gave us an opportunity. And Deegan is one of those people, destiny helpers, that I was able and privileged to meet in my life's journey who gave me an opportunity to write for a well-known publication, The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm forever grateful to him, and I wanted to sit down and have a chat with him about his journey in magazines, in media, and pick his brain about his advice and his thoughts on those who are in the magazine industry or pursuing to work in it. And one key thing that I took away is that he said you've got to value and keep relationships with people because you never know when you have to call on somebody in the industry. Magazines, media, especially nowadays with a lot of uh, media houses scaling down, but magazines specifically, the turnover rate can be high. And somebody is here one year and then they're gone next year, or even in PR, they're here, one moment and then there's a new PR. So we have to learn how to value relationships. A little bit about Deegan. He's based in West Hollywood and he focuses on environment, culture, and design. And he's currently the executive editor of Four Seasons magazine, Four Seasons as in the luxury hotel brand. And he's the former deputy editor of The Hollywood Reporter. He has written for the New York Times, New York Magazine, Santa Barbara Magazine, Wallpaper, Veranda, Los Angeles Magazine, and Out. So I hope that you take away something inspiring from this conversation with Degen Pener that you can apply to your own life. So enjoy. Degen, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with you about your journey in journalism. And I hope that it will inspire maybe a young person who's thinking of going into magazines or media of any kind. But my first question before getting into your journey with publications is I didn't realize you were a history major, and
Hi.
so am I. What
Nice. Nice.
what inspired you, at 18 to want to major in history?
It's something I can't quite recall. It feels like I kind of just fell into it. I had gotten a scholarship to go to Washington University in the humanities, which was amazing to receive that. And I'll always be grateful to Washington University for that. And I ended up in this program called Focus in my freshman year, and that was pretty focused on history. I had this really great professor named Max Openfuss, and we just read a lot of books that really blew my mind about like the history of the Sturrug and how it changed, the course of history and world civilization. And so yeah, it was about the focus of the Focus course was on the history of technology. So I think that just really drew me in and was stuff I hadn't learned about before.
Wow, was that your focus then for your history degree is, like, the history of technology, of objects like that?
No, I ended up by my senior year, I did my senior thesis on the sort of rise of celebrity fandom in the
Oh.
era of film, and I went back and read magazines from the 19 teens. I would go down to the public library in St. Louis and read Photoplay magazine, and I was looking at how people talked about celebrities and stars, and like and the way they described them as being a change from sort of the 19th century, when there was a focus on character, and into the new century, and there was a focus on personality as being the most important thing, and that how that paralleled other changes in society.
Wow, fascinating. Like, I knew since 4th grade that I wanted to major in history, and I kept with it all the way up to graduating high school. Knew I was gonna still major in history, but my dad gave me the hardest time. He's like, "You're not gonna make any money with that. What are you gonna do, teach school with it?" And I got so tired of him bothering me about it, and when he would say, "What are you gonna do with the degree?" I said, "I'm gonna make history with it." So he would get off
I love
my back.
that.
But did you have any plan of what you were gonna do with the degree when you were in school?
No, not really. I have never been someone that like planned ahead that much, I would say. And um I just kind of thought I would probably be like a professor or stay in academia or something. But it's over like winter break of senior year, I sort of had like a bit of a anxiety attack for about 3 solid days, like wondering and worrying about what I was going to do with my life after college. And all of a sudden I had this kind of light bulb went off that said nothing beyond sort of I really like reading magazines. I really like magazines. So then I decided I wanted to pursue working in a magazine after college.
Wow, interesting. Um, do you feel that your history degree prepared you for the magazine world in any way?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just as far as like learning how to write, learning how to express myself, learning how to do research, learning how to, you know, take information and filter it and synthesize it and use it correctly. I mean, I would I would hire we're getting ahead, but my first when I was eventually the head of the fact checking department at New York Magazine, and I would hire people just as much from, journalism backgrounds as from, liberal arts backgrounds.
I think that history majors don't get enough credit because I think it's a hard degree, or at least my professors were hard in thinking analytically. It's not just memorizing dates, and it's not like elementary school where you're just doing multiple choice. Well, okay, there were multiple choice testing in university, but I had a lot of hard professors that really um my challenge was having to think analytically, and I think that comes of use in the magazine world where you don't give just a surface level article. You're looking at, well, what were the factors of why this thing happened, or, having to do research on historical elements, even if it's just of a fashion brand, if you're doing a feature piece. So I think that a history degree does service, or it should get a lot more credit than what people may think a history degree can offer.
Yeah, and
So,
it's all storytelling. History, journalism, it's all storytelling.
indeed. If you were 18 now, would you go into magazines? Would you have majored in history? Would you do the same journey route you've done?
I think probably yes. I mean, it's certainly been a career that's exposed me to so much, from travel to meeting interesting people to, I mean, to interviewing, you know, legendary names over the years. And I like sort of going behind the scenes of things. I've always enjoyed that, whether it was, in college when I was working as a cater waiter, and we would go to like the big public library in St. Louis, and like we'd walk through the stacks of books, to like with trays of food to go out to the dining room. Like I love that behind the scenes aspect of it. And journalism, has certainly afforded me that to meet the people, see what people are like, beyond like their public persona.
Yeah. Do you think you could find yourself teaching college or being an adjunct professor in history?
Probably, maybe not. Yeah, I don't regret like, like deciding not to pursue academia. I've really enjoyed my work as a journalist, and it certainly had its ups and downs over the years. But um, gosh, I mean, I've interviewed everyone from Vidal Sassoon to Richard Avedon to Audrey Hepburn to tons of other stars over the years, and I've done travel writing and gone on amazing trips, to everywhere from Bali to I don't know where else, but I just got back from a work trip to Geneva. I go to the Watches and Wonders timepiece show every year, which I really enjoy in Switzerland. So, I mean, journalism can really open the world up in really fascinating ways.
It can. And would you say that life unfolds how it's supposed to be? Like if you stay ambitious, when you're 18, young, and you maybe one door closes, internships, you kind of find yourself where you're supposed to be. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I um I think you have to keep, there's a lot of keeping up with changes in the world and journalism. Like I feel like I was in danger at one point of just being like, someone who knew how to do print. And then, eventually the Hollywood Reporter really like, you know, obviously, learn everything to do with digital and, writing SEO headlines and everything, with that, was kind of a big learning experience. And now, but strangely enough, I'm kind of back focused a lot on print right now and not as
Okay.
much digital. Yeah. Yeah.
Things ebb and flow. Can you talk about your journey from 18, graduating college? How did you find yourself at the New York Magazine, the New York Times, and Hollywood Reporter? Can you talk about that journey?
Yeah. I'm always going to be grateful to Nick Dolan and Kelly Pryor. And Nick worked in the fact checking department at New York Magazine, and Kelly was the head of the fact checking department. And to be honest, like I had a family member who went to college with Nick, and she introduced me to him. He introduced me to his boss. I She happened to be from Missouri. I grew up in Kansas City. There was like a bit of a personal connection there. I didn't get a job offer right away. I was brought on as like a permalancer, like a full-time freelancer, basically, for 7, 8, 9 months doing fact checking. And every day I went in hoping like the position would open up. That I'd eventually get hired there, and that eventually, came to pass after, a number of months there. And then I was in the checking department probably for about 2.5 years at the time, eventually headed up the department. Um, I think that was a great way to learn journalism because you're basically taking a story and unpacking it and
Mm,
finding every component that went into creating the piece, kind of like stress testing, like where there might be problems in the story.
yes.
Um, and also like we did a lot of, really sensitive, like provocative pieces back then at New York Magazine, and then they still do. So I was on the phone a lot with the legal department to figure out like, legally where we stood on things. So it was a great learning experience. Sometimes you realize who the really good writers were, and sometimes you realize who the writers, were where you had to really, fill in some blanks.
Sure. Sure, it sounds like it was a really good start because you didn't have a journalism degree to learn kind of about the technical aspects of fact
Hmm.
checking, that you're
Yeah.
kind of thrown in, but in the best department to start out.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, because I've felt as a contributor to publications that in some ways I'm lacking because I have a history degree, I have an international relations master's degree. I don't have a journalism degree to learn about the rules. I took a short journalism course when I was in London, so I did get an overview of some of those ethical things, but it's nice when I I guess, go to school for it or work in a publication where that's what your job is in that
Yeah.
department.
That job felt like school looking. I've never thought of it that way, but it really did feel like school for sure. For sure. God,
Yeah.
the most stressful thing I ever had to do was we had like a story about some classical musician who claimed that his parents had like beat him when he was a kid. And I had to call up the parents and ask them to respond to that. Oh, yeah. I don't remember what they said, but I did it, but yeah, not fun
Yeah,
you had to make sure you get the responses and run the denials correctly and all that
of
stuff.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
went from New York Magazine to New York Times, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little step there as far as I was in the fact checking department at New York Magazine, and set my sights on on wanting to be the number two stringer, the number two writer on the Intelligencer column at New York Magazine, which was their gossip column, and
Mhm.
so I was going out all the time to events around New York and meeting people, and I started trying to give scoops and item with gossip to the two people that were on the gossip column in New York Magazine. Um, and so and to sort of prove myself that, be considered for that role, should that, that second writer position, I'll get up there. So yeah, when Joanna Malloy left to go to the Daily News, it was offered that job as worked for a woman named Jeanette Walls, who wrote this amazing memoir called The Glass Castle later in life. She was an amazing boss. And yeah, so I
Yeah.
did that job for about a year and a half as a gossip column. I was out constantly in New York in the 90s, meeting people, getting scoops, hearing, trying to get, the, the latest intel on what was happening around town. Uh, and then, yeah, was hired as like one of the founding columnists of the style section of the Times when that launched in 92, 93 by Adam Moss, the legendary editor Adam Moss, and the also incredible editor Stephen Drucker, who created the style section at the time, which had its own controversies. That the famous Gray Lady, the New York Times was starting a style section with this column called Egos and Ends that I was the writer on, which was kind of seen as sort of a gossip column.
I see. How was the New York Times a school for you? Was it a school in any way where you learned something new from New York Magazine?
I mean, I was an independent contractor
Okay.
for the New York Times. I didn't have health insurance. I worked down in my apartment. I just dealt with my one editor mostly and some notes from uh from some higher up editors. So I don't know that I learned a lot from the Times culture. I didn't feel like a real major part of the New York Times culture, but I certainly learned a lot about, yeah, deadlines. I mean, we were doing it. I had to fill like a half page of the section of the of the newspaper every week. So and we had some scoops, and then we had like a Q&A we did every week. Like I was the first person to report that a young rap star named Marky Mark was going to appear in underwear ads for Calvin Klein. Um, I did a piece about Barry Diller was going to consult on stagecraft for the Democratic National Convention, though I got my hand slapped on that one because the political desk at the Times didn't didn't like that the style section had this news, and so we were told to stay on that lane going forward in the style section and not touch politics. So that was interesting. I mean, the Times is famously territorial, so I
Sure.
guess that was a little bit of a learning experience.
Sure. Um, let's see. Can you or you seem like somebody who really likes to give opportunity to contributors and young people. Why is it important that magazines, media outlets make space for contributing voices?
Oh yeah, I mean, not yesterday. I had a really great chat with a young filmmaker who I know who's doing it was a short film coming out, and he asked me to help him like brainstorm ways to promote the film, and it was so much fun to spend. Like we just spent 30 minutes on the phone, and we're brainstorming and coming up with ideas for how to get attention for his film. I mean, he's not a journalist, but
Sure.
um, I think it's just because I'm just again, like I said earlier, I've always been grateful for my first job, and I never want to forget that feeling of being given a chance. I I I don't think I had a lot of confidence early on in myself as a writer. I think I when I first moved to New York, I thought, oh, I'd really like I said, I really like magazines, and maybe I could work in circulation or something at a magazine. Like it was sort of beyond me to just explicitly say to myself, like, I want to be a writer, even though I'd been like editor of my high school newspaper, and I wrote for a literary journal in college a little bit, and I was actually the um, high school correspondent for our local paper in Connecticut, and I would write. I was published in high school in our local paper, writing stuff news from our high school. But I just again, like it was sort of eluded me that this idea that I could be a writer, and writing was really hard for me early on. I felt like it was like putting like little bricks in a wall, each word.
Yes.
It wasn't until someone sort of like, because I was such a perfectionist that I had a singing teacher at one point in New York, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and she said, Deegan, like you need to like try to shoot for like a C grade on the story when you sit down to write. Like just let it, dive into the
Yeah.
story and start writing and then perfect it later. And I don't know why that really uh, got to me and stuck with me, and it helped free me up as a writer. But yeah, I think it can be, incredibly hard to get started in in this business. So I've always been
Yes.
supportive of younger writers, and working with interns. When we were when I was at Hollywood Reporter, I have an intern right now who I'm mentoring and helping with, and we did like she wrote some stuff recently, and we sat down and we did like a Zoom call, and we did like a live edit session together where we just went through,
Nice.
you know. You don't always have time to do that, but I was like, I wanted to make the time to sit down and just go word by word and be like, this is why I like this. This is why this doesn't work. This could be better here. This is too general. Needs to be more specific. And she was really appreciative of that. And that felt good to help somebody else out.
Of course. And I think these young people are looking for that kind of guidance, instead of just sitting in their internships and not really having anything that challenges them or guides them. And it's really great that you help to empower and lift other people up. You did that for me when you were at
Yeah.
Hollywood Reporter, and I'm just so grateful you gave me the opportunity to contribute.
Oh, that's so
So,
nice to hear. It was a pleasure. Yeah.
yeah, you touch
And a lot
lives
of
and
people missed down on that, with the pandemic and not, having that one-on-one contact, and I think that's why work from home can be like really, hard, or even as a freelancer, if you're not, interacting one-on-one and face to face,
Mhm.
yeah, you can not get that sort of added layer of mentorship sometimes.
That's true. How did you find yourself from New York to LA? What took you out to Los
So
Angeles?
looking back, so I worked at New York Magazine, New York Times. It felt very like focused on like a certain place, like obviously New York City. Um, I eventually transitioned into working at more big consumer magazines like Elle, Entertainment Weekly, In Style, Details, and I, it wasn't as enjoyable for me. Enjoyable for me, I think it was felt a little disconnected from the reader in a
Mhm.
way, and like again like a sense of place. And my last job in New York was as an entertainment editor of Details magazine. And beyond the fact that I didn't feel like I fit in with the culture there because it was a bit broy, um, I was basically like a cover booker. So, I was just trying to book, one of six male stars for each issue of the magazine that had a movie out that month. It was not a creative um real endeavor, I would say. I didn't enjoy that too much. The publicists in Hollywood had so much of the power, and you're just waiting for someone to say yes. So and we didn't get a yes, and we had yeah, you were under a lot of pressure to find someone, or you book someone that your boss wasn't happy with, and you'd have to just go with it. Yeah, I moved to the West Coast for personal reasons. My partner at the time wanted to go back to grad school. And he said, you know, I got into school in Santa Barbara. Do you want to leave New York and move there? And I was like, sure, let's do it. Let's do it. And that was really fun. That was really fun.
Yeah.
I eventually started working as a features editor at Santa Barbara magazine
Okay.
when I lived in Santa Barbara. So that was part of my transition to becoming an editor, more from being a writer anymore. Because even though my title was entertainment editor at Details, I wasn't doing much editing. Again, it was just cover booking.
Do you prefer California to New York City or the LA area? Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love it out here. Yeah, my partner and I, now partner and I, have a child, and it's a great place to raise a kid. I live in one of the most high walk score neighborhoods on the West Coast in West Hollywood. I have a dog, I have fruit trees, I have a garden, I have wonderful neighbors. I do I'm not a weekly, a monthly volunteer trash cleanup event through my local coffee shop. Like, I really have a nice sense of community out here. And of course, know all the other dog owners in the neighborhood too.
Of course, it seems like maybe there's more of a community in Southern Cal well, I guess you find community in New York City too, but maybe just in a different way because you have
Yeah,
nature and space.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I loved New York when I was there, but when I was done, I was kind of done. Yeah.
Um, you speak of the trash community pickup that you do, and one
Yeah.
question that I have is, when I interviewed a former Hollywood Reporter editor, she noted how it's very important, or her advice, and for people in magazines is to have something like it's great to do your work, your 9 to 5 and be committed to that, but you also need something else that you're pouring into that you're passionate about. Um, so would you also agree that yes, it's great you do your magazine work, you're focused on that, but you also need something else outside to be passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being a parent is definitely a huge part of that creates balance in your life. I think that was the first time in my life that I really felt like, there are moments where I don't matter. My kid is more important to me right now. And I think that creates really good perspective, and
Mhm.
helps you with your work to be like, okay, you know what? We'll figure it out. I don't need to freak out here about all this. So I also got to go get it for my daughter.
Nice.
And then I've always had an interest in environmental and sustainability topics and subjects. So I tried to do it, as much coverage as I could at the Hollywood Reporter on that. In addition to I mean, at the Hollywood Reporter, I oversaw everything was to do with style, lifestyle, culture. So I was responsible for overseeing fashion, beauty, jewelry, watches, travel, restaurants, art, design, architecture. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but so sustainability was one, and green sort of a part of that. But since I left the Reporter, I was with the board of a nonprofit called Habits of Waste that's working to reduce single-use plastic pollution around the world. So that's been a good outlet for me as well.
That's good. What did you take away from your time at The Hollywood Reporter?
Again, working both with creating a really great print product and then also focusing on digital traffic was a great learning experience. I also launched our ecom slash shopping affiliate link vertical there, and that was really interesting to learn about that. Um, I mean, working with our then editorial director Janice Min, when we first launched the Reporter as a glossy weekly magazine. I think it was learning. It was like creating. Like, I mean, we just really created a template for how to cover style and lifestyle from a Hollywood perspective, and always like thinking about like what makes this a Hollywood Reporter style story.
Mm,
We really leaned into thinking about the industry in LA as like the town and the people here as a community. And so we really also did a lot of really insider stories, shooting people's houses or their art collections or, um, you know, people in Hollywood who opened restaurants. Like there was a lot of intersection of, the business and the Hollywood lifestyle. And I
sure.
think, um, yeah, I think, creating a magazine that always felt like you had that point of view, um, dialed in all the time, that was something really fun to work on. Also, Janice really was amazing at writing very grabby headlines, so, I learned a lot, there as well from her.
That's great. So there's a lot of journalists, even when they're working for outlets, but especially if they choose to leave or they get laid off, they start doing like Substacks and YouTube channels, podcasts. Um, what advice do you have to a person in media who may have been laid off or they chose to leave and they're wanting to do their own platforms, their own things? What advice do you have?
Um, I don't have experience with Substack. I mean, I joined Substack. I haven't posted anything on it. I read stuff on there. I, I think the main advice would just to always keep up relationships in the business, don't burn bridges. um
Mm,
I have been laid off twice in my career, once in my 20s from what was it, my 20s from Elle magazine, and from the Hollywood Reporter about a year and a half ago. um I think, I don't know if you asked that exactly, but I think, working on your mental health and acknowledging like, the lack of confidence that can come from being laid off, just the shock and the, sadness around that, feeling like you have put so much into a job and then all of a sudden you're not needed can be like a major kind of shock to the system. I mean, luckily got a call like 6 weeks later and started a really new chapter at a new job. I work as the editor of the magazine in Four Seasons Hotels, which is a quarterly magazine. But I also, that's probably like half to two-thirds of my work. And then I also freelance for a lot of places. And I'm actually back doing a lot with the Hollywood Reporter recently. I um, just edited an entire issue about travel, a digital issue that's focused on travel for the Hollywood Reporter, and I'm working on I just wrote something for their sustainability issue. I'm writing for that Ankler as well, that where Janice Ian is, and my our old deputy editorial director Allison is there as well. So I write for C Magazine, um, which is a California lifestyle magazine. I've been working with them
Oh, yeah.
since they launched 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
again, like those relationships are super important in this business, and you know, there are times when you're like, oh, I don't want to write for these people again. Like you get that
I
way.
know,
And you know what I mean?
like a
Over
small
certain
ego.
ego. So,
Yeah.
you know, I, I just like a never say never. Is that the right term? Like person
Yeah.
sometimes, like, I just, yeah, I think you need to, you know, always also just have as many, many outlets, that you can work with at any one time as possible, because you never know when an editor is going to leave and a new editor comes in and they don't want to work with you. And so I started doing some branding work last year as well, which was a really fun project, and that's been an ongoing thing. So it's a big mix, basically.
Yeah. I
I know a
always
lot of
find
who, yeah, who do
Oh, go ahead
branding
on.
stuff. Yeah, I just know a lot more writers than I ever realized that also do like branding stuff on the side, because that kind of can create a base, for
For
like all the
sure.
freelance. Yeah.
And doing, like, in-house comms for companies and organizations, a lot of
Yeah.
them move there. I always find, as you said in that the beginning of being laid off or let go, it's a shock to the system. It's like your world is rocked, and it takes some, days or weeks to recover from that, but sometimes maybe that's just life's way of pivoting us and taking us to the next thing. Although it can be a shock, sometimes it can when you look back on it, you're like, "Actually, this was the greatest thing that happened to me." Because either you go and launch your own thing or you start working with another, publication, so, yeah.
Totally. I mean, I'm working on a magazine that comes out. The Four Seasons magazine comes out every 3 months. It's a quarterly, so like it's a very and we have all this time to refine it and tweak everything and make it look beautiful, and then get this beautiful print product that you can hold in your hand. That's like on this great heavy paper. It looks really good. It's nice to just be able to hand your work to someone, and it's like it's really gratifying. And that's such a different cadence than what I had at the Hollywood Reporter, where we were coming out weekly. I think at one point we were posting. I mean, it was a much bigger team, but I think there were 350 to 400 articles going up every week on the website. You'd get a call on Sunday morning that, a fashion designer had just, had died, and we needed to write an obituary in 90 minutes and try to get it online, and beat your competitor. So I like that aspect of, breaking news, but it's also like can take a toll. So
Sure.
I'm glad that I can break from that a bit right now. Yeah.
Yeah. The slow life, and being able to do s it's like a collector's piece, it sounds like the Four Seasons magazine, so it's a different pace.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple of last questions.
Yeah.
Um, when you look at your career thus far, what's been the most memorable part?
I guess some of the interviews I mentioned with Al Sassoon, who I got to meet later in his career. He might have been around 80 at the time, and interviewing him about his career and his love of how much he wanted to be an architect. And he went into hair and he revolutionized haircuts by treating hair as architecture. Um, that was a highlight. He sent me a note afterwards, and he said that he really liked my piece because he recognized himself, and that was a really nice, really great compliment to get. I'm trying to think. That's just one interview, but uh, again, working on this magazine right now is amazing because it just looks so good. It's um some people have told me that they said it kind of inspires a feeling of wanderlust and that it's super lively and it's again that it's beautiful. So that's been really fun. Um Trying to think of what else. I mean, when I was at in Santa Barbara and worked at Santa Barbara Magazine, I really love like all the beautiful old garden and the old estates up there. So we used to go
Mm,
do photo shoots and do interviews at some of these estates from the 19 teens and 20s and 30s. And again, like we was talking about earlier about going behind the scenes of things, like that was a real thrill when I lived up there and learning about the history of some of these kind of eccentric characters that built some of these places was really fun.
sure. Last question. I'm 37. What advice would you tell your 37-year-old self?
What was I doing when I was 37? Oh my gosh. I think I was in Santa Barbara at the time. Um, I'm a little stumped on this one. Well, that's really when I was moving from more from being a writer to being also an editor. So I do like editing quite a bit. I like coming up with ideas nowadays and finding the perfect writer is a great match for a piece. Or, or just finding a writer who has a great idea and having it, come to fruition. Um, I don't know that I still am trying to find a little more joy in writing, I would say. I mean, it's not the torture that it used to be, but I don't know if it's as much joy as I would like. So, um, yeah, I think the advice is just to like 37 to yourself would just be to like have like some, faith that, you can persevere and that, um, things can change in your life and your career. So I think I was probably in the middle of that transition from writer to editor. So I didn't know that that was really coming and that, that I would, go on to I was eventually then editor in chief of Angelino magazine and then the culture editor, Helver Reporter. So yeah, just be patient and hopeful, I guess would be the advice.
Yeah, things will work themselves out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Deegan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on today. It's good to see you.
Yes, you as well.
I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.